got kicked out of school?
So Robert Zemeckis' depiction of that childhood 1940 story Pinocchio aired itself today. Now we need to talk about this movie, but this is not going to be a very long review. This is actually very straightforward. If you've seen the 1940s cartoon edition and you've seen the other depictions, this basically follows the exact same frame of work. This time it's starring Tom Hanks as Geppetto. Of course, all the old characters are back, Jiminy Cricket, and of course the one childhood wooden boy, Pinocchio. Now, from start to finish, there are a couple of things that are taken out, some new characters that are introduced, and some other characters that are also introduced, and even some different depictions from old creatures that we had known. One example of this is Monstro, and there's also a seagull that somehow talks in this as well. There's another young lady that Pinocchio works with when he joins up into the in the carnival, let's just say, right, that he begins to interact with and he develops a friendship with this character. Now, I'm trying not to spoil so much of the live action version, so I'm just going to be very generic with my review. In this case, of course, we know, if you haven't read about this story or heard about this story, a young puppet boy is brought to life by a fairy who assigns him to lead a virtuous life in order to become a real boy after he is created by his creator, Geppetto, who eventually does become his father. Pinocchio is on this journey to become a real boy and goes through all of the life and times and challenges of becoming a real boy. Now, one crazy thing that you have to really take into consideration when it comes to this movie, all of what transpires, from good, bad, or indifferent, all happens within the time span of a day, which is just absolutely insane, because there was one genuine scene that made me laugh, and it was a scene where Pinocchio is, after having escaped what is it, Paradise Island, I believe it is, right? He escapes from Paradise Island, and now he's on a search to find his father, Geppetto. And Geppetto is in the middle of the water. Of course, we know this is just before Monstro eats him and Geppetto. Pinocchio is riding on the water after being carried by this seagull, and he's explaining all of what transpired from he got kicked out of school, he joined a carnival, he became partially famous, he made a lot of money, he lost the money, he was kidnapped, he was then taken off to Paradise Island, and then he ran into a guy named Lampwick who turned into a donkey and such, and then, you know, he had to escape from some demons. By the way, there's demons in this movie now somehow, but he escaped from those creatures. He jumped off a cliff, he went home, realized Geppetto's not there, then he came onto the water, and now here he is. And Tom Hanks, he kind of looks befuddled, where he asked him, all of this happened in one day?
Jiminy helped me, and we jumped off a cliff into the sea and swam to shore, where we found out you sold all your clothes to buy a boat so you could look for me, and now we're here!
You did all that in one day?
Now, I didn't really spoil anything minus the demon thing, right? There's nothing else there to spoil. If you've seen the 1940s edition or any other depiction of Pinocchio, then you very much know that this follows along the exact same time frame and the same storyline, right? As for this movie now, I think it is okay. Tom Hanks seems like he had an Italian accent, like he was working with an Italian accent in the beginning of this movie, and then it just slowly, he should have worked on that a little bit more. It just slowly disappears. Like every now and then he'll turn on the Italian accent and then he'll turn it off. But I think he kind of struggled with holding on to it. I think the real standout character in this whole thing, in all honesty, is probably Jiminy Cricket. Jiminy Cricket seems to be the most accurate depiction versus Pinocchio. Pinocchio spends the majority of this movie saying the word father, and Geppetto spends the majority of this movie looking for Pinocchio, which is fine. But Jiminy seems to be the only actual standout character in the entirety of this movie, because you see, you know, his arrival from the beginning of the movie. He's also one of the narrators, and then it ends off with him and Pinocchio, you know, and eventually Pinocchio becoming a real boy. But I think he was the most true to the actual cartoon version in the entire story. Now, with all that said, there are a couple of things that I like. I like the fact that they introduced some different characters. It really did bring Pinocchio's journey onto life. I like the depiction of Pinocchio. I like this depiction. This is one that I could say is not a bad live action. I think Tom Hanks did a okay job. I mean, it's Tom Hanks, for goodness sake, right? Have we ever seen Tom Hanks really make a bad movie, right? Quite possibly one of the greatest actors of all time, right? But in this case now, I like the fact that on Paradise Island, Pinocchio is depicted as really struggling with his own conscience and the things that he knows that he's right. However, this is a little bit of a different depiction, because in the cartoon version, you know for a fact, and I know for a fact, Pinocchio indulged in some of the bad habits that the other kids indulged in, and namely Lampwick. Lampwick was the character I was really looking for, to see how far would they really go when it came down to Lampwick, because I know Lampwick is that friend that your parents always tell you to stay away from, and it's for good reason. Lampwick was a drinker at a very young age, and he was a smoker at a very young age, and he did all the bad things and looked forward to doing all the bad things, and this is why he turned into a donkey full way. Pinocchio followed along with Lampwick. In this version, he doesn't. So there's a bit of a difference. Pinocchio seems to be wrestling with his own feelings and his own emotions, and even when Jiminy Cricket is not there, he still seems to be wrestling with his own feelings and his own emotions, and his conscience seems to be present even with Jiminy not present. In the cartoon, you know that Jiminy was basically beating it into Pinocchio's head to stop what he's doing, and he wouldn't listen, right? So that is some of the difference. If there is something that I didn't like, I thought they would have stayed on Paradise Island a little bit more to kind of give a full understanding of how far depravity can really take you if you're left to your own devices and your own temptations, and you really begin to give into temptation, because that's what that whole thing was about. You can indulge in every pleasure that your heart could desire as a child, and because of that, now you suffered the consequences. That was the moral of the story when it came to the cartoon. This one, it was started and then over in a heartbeat. Not to mention that the drinks that they were indulging in did not really seem all that realistic. I mean, they were blowing over foam, and then when they drank it, the whole thing looked like CGI. Monstro seems to be a bit of a whale tentacle squid, half a whale, half a squid looking thing, right? So overall, I think the movie was okay for a live action. Disney's been doing this forever, and I don't think that they butchered this one. They brought it right to streaming, so I don't know what they plan on making with it. But if I had to give this a rating, I'd probably give this about a 5 out of 10. Namely because I think it is worth a watch, but I don't think it can hold a candle to the original. Not very many can, right? Once the originals are there, it's very difficult to then create a live action that can actually stand the test of time. And I think this one was okay. I just don't think it was all that great. Maybe if they kept more of the storyline intact and allowed for Pinocchio to fully go where we know Pinocchio went, and then for his conscience to really play that guide, then maybe I'd give it a bit of a higher rating. But for now, I think you should watch this movie. Right? I wouldn't see any reason to deter anyone. But that's all I have for today. You guys let me know what you think, whether or not you've already seen this, and let me know your opinion on it. And I will see you again for the next one. See ya.